So welcome back. How was it? Tell me. I know a lot of you guys got to share your inventories, and a lot of you got to listen to inventories. So tell me, what was it like? What was it like to share your inventory? Somebody give me one word to describe what it was like sharing your inventory.
Raw.
Raw. Yeah. Raw. What else? Therapeutic. Validating. Vulnerable. Yeah. Yeah, you putting yourself out there. Yeah, therapeutic. I like that. Yeah, it kind of feels like a kind of a clinical kind of thing. Yeah, that's good. Anything else? Any other words come to mind? All right. So then what was it like to listen to somebody share their story? What's a word to describe that? Connection? Compassion? Witness? Uh-huh. Relatable. Yeah. Validating. Right. That's kind of what I got, is that, and so in listening to story, it helped to clear my story. So something brought out, and I got clarity of a way to rearrange things in my inventory that helped me get, so wait a minute, I'm putting this before this, and really this is more where the energy is. So it was I was able to kind of focus better, but by listening to somebody share their story. So did you get a sense of a kind of communal healing that each of us, we all, no matter what end of that spectrum we're on, that we're all getting better, that there's healing going on, right? Yeah. Well, I commend you guys. Give yourselves a hand for doing your fifth step. And we skipped kind of, I sort of got a little ahead of time, and we didn't get to read. Do y'all want to see what the big book has to say? Oh, you know what else, though? I forgot this. So we need to finish up. We really didn't finish with the inventory. So we've still got our character assets hidden, and we need to take care of that. But I wanted to do one more thing. There was one passage that we read that I want to look at one more time. And that's going to be on page 69. Do you remember in the last paragraph, I asked you to highlight one sentence that was in the middle of the last paragraph on page 69. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in doing so. So I wanted to do a what if with you on your inventory. So what if, by some weird quirk of magic, that the people on your inventory were to magically show up here later today? I know. It seems unlikely, but just if you were to see the people on your inventory later today, is there any of the things on your inventory that if you saw them, that you'd be willing to say, I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and I want to make it right? Is there anything on your inventory like that? It's something that if you really bumped into them, you might be willing to say you were willing to make an amends. Now, I'm not saying go do it. I'm just saying that you'd be willing to do it. I want you to look over your whole inventory, and any of the things on there you'd be willing to make an amends for, circle those now. Take just a minute to see if there's anything on there that if you bumped into the people tonight, and it may be yourself on there. You may have yourself on the inventory, and you say, I'd be willing to make amends to myself. Yep. So just look over your whole inventory. I tell you, you guys have gotten past the really hard part. That inventory sharing part, that's the tough. It's really tough. I commend you guys for doing that. Okay. Does anybody need an extra minute? Raise your hands. Everybody got something? Y'all got something? Okay, good. All right, so now I wanted to look at the liabilities and asset side. So on your inventory, you may have some, I want you to open up the asset side. And part of the inventory process is to determine where are my character defects and which are my assets, right? That's one of the purposes of the inventory, is to point us out which they are. We all have some liabilities, we all have some assets, but many of us are just kind of confused as to what they are. So as you look down your inventory, you've got some rows that have more things written down than other rows. Is that true? Yeah. And some rows don't have hardly anything there, or less things. So each one of those rows that has more items listed there, those represent your character liabilities. And the rows that you have fewer things written down on, those represent your character assets. So what I want you to do now is any of the rows where you have the most things listed, I want you to circle the words as liabilities right now. So whichever ones have the most, circle those as liabilities.
Circle the assets as liabilities, or the...
So if whatever you have the most of are liabilities, and the ones that you don't have very few of, those are assets. So circle the word on the other side. So that way you're going to have some things that are more of a struggle for you, some things that are not so much, right? Does you see what I'm saying? So you should have some words circled on the left, some words circled on the right. You should have a look at see. So basically, when you do that, you basically are looking at a snapshot of your character. I know, yeah. So what do you think about that? What do you think of? Do you see the? Could you get a new paper? I know. Yeah, so some of the things on my inventory, I look at, and yeah, there's some ouches on there, but then there's some other things that are really great. Do you have anything on there that doesn't seem to jive for you, that seems to be, or do you, let me ask it this way. First of all, do you feel like that's a fair representation of your character? What do you, this would be yes, and this would be no. Do y'all think it's a fair representation? Okay, that's pretty neutral. I'm just saying. Does anybody feel like that they see something that really doesn't jive with how they believe about themselves? Have you got the courage to say out loud what that would be?
Forgiveness.
Okay, so it says you have the asset of forgiveness, or it says that you're not forgiving.
I'm not forgiving.
You are not.
No.
And it says you are.
I thought I was forgiving.
Okay.
And it says I'm not.
And then let me say. Okay. It says it's brilliant. It says I'm pretty forgiving, but it says I'm not. And so we're going to have a problem out back any minute. Now, well, let me color that another way. I got one for you. So I'm going to say that I'm going to make up something about you. That I think inside you've got the core belief of forgiveness. And I think that you are really a very forgiving person. But I would think that your capacity to forgive is somewhat diminished by the fact that you're holding on to some resentments. And that if we could, by some form of magic, somehow reduce your resentments, that I think your capacity for forgiveness would blossom and even become greater. What do you think about that? Bam! I should just fly back to Mississippi now, because I can't do better than that. That was it. I felt like Tony Robbins right there at one of his things he does. No, I don't know. Should I heal you? No, I should. So no. But And so a lot of we kind of tend to think that if I got this one thing, it means I ain't got none of the other, and that's not the truth. The reality is every one of us, in some measure, have all of the assets of character. But many of them are part of our basic core beliefs that we honestly believe in and would go take a bullet for. But when the reality is they're being impeded by things in our life that are causing us pain. And it keeps us from really reaching our full potential. So that's what this is about. That's what this is about. This is about dealing with those. But when we do the surrender of the seventh step, we're going to, if you recall, we're going to surrender all, good and bad. And so if we don't know what the good is, if we're not paying attention to what the good is, how do we know what we're surrendering? And if we're only focusing on the bad, then are we just shaming ourselves? Because that is not true. And it never is true that we're just a bunch of liabilities. Are you kidding me? And the steps, I think, too many times can be used as a shaming tool to try to, and that's just not the reality. And it's not contrary to what the book says. The book doesn't say that. Yeah. So I'm proud. Thank you for having that, for saying that for us. That was good. Anybody else? Is there anything else that you feel that's just
Well, actually, I just have a question.
Yes.
How many things, when you say, like, you have a lot of things written, obviously I know I have a lot of things written, but how many would you say is a few things to go with an asset? Because I have something written almost every line. So it's always be a liability.
I know.
Would you say, does that have to be totally empty of writing something, or just a few things?
Yeah. Well, I know. Basically, it kind of depends. We took just a real quick stab at this, right? And so we didn't spend a lot of time doing deep exploration, and for good reason, right? I mean, we're just looking at a process. And so certainly if we were to spend more time and really exploring those liabilities more deeply and ask more questions, we probably could have colored this to look slightly altered. And so all we're doing is looking at a process. I want somebody, when I'm taking somebody new through the steps, my goal is to get them to step 12 as quickly as possible, for them to have a spiritual awakening and to create some sort of truth about themselves, the good and the bad. I just want to see themselves clearly. And certainly if we did this again tomorrow, we might see some alteration, not all overly drastic, we might see some little difference in this. So I would say don't get too caught up in this being some permanent, branded, sizzling look at you that is rigid and not to be changed. Does that seem sizzling? Would you like sizzling? Like I was branding you, And so yeah, this is kind of just an overview. Just an overview. Yeah. So, and you had you got it. Okay, good. Well, I commend you all. I'm proud of you for doing that. It's hard looking at ourselves, but you guys did a great job. I want to do one more thing with this before we move on. So looking at your character defects and assets, I want to do another kind of what if. So what if, by some form of magic, that starting today, moving forward, the liabilities that you circled for you would slowly start to dissolve and become manageable? And what if at the same time the assets, all of them, would slowly start to blossom and take over and really start to color and affect your life? If that were to happen for you, what would your life start to look like? Somebody give me a word, one word that would describe that.
Simple.
Okay. Simple. Hopeful. I like it. Manageable. Foreign. Yeah, it would be so different. Okay, I like that. That's new. Okay, foreign.
Truthful.
Truthful.
Positive.
Positive. Anything else come to mind? Peaceful. Yeah. Anything else come to mind? Fantasy. Yeah, well, it'd be a fantasy. It'd be kind of you'd be living a fantasy life, like one that's hard to be out of a book or something. Disney can't do. Yeah, right. Fantasy. I like that. And we mean fantasy in the best sort of way. Yeah. I'm saying. Anything else come to mind? Okay, so I'm going to tell you something. Yes.
Well, when you said that our liabilities would start to...
Yeah, the liabilities would start to slowly dissolve and become manageable.
So I'm in ACA,
Mm-hmm.
and at first last week we were reading a section that talked about integrating the laundry list,
Mm-hmm.
and that really confused me because integrating
Mm-hmm.
is become a part of something, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to get rid of our laundry list.
Mm-hmm.
But we were talking about that and thought, actually, we don't want to completely eliminate that side of us, right? Because,
Right.
we don't want to trust absolutely everyone.
Exactly.
Those can become assets if we kind of go down here
Mm-hmm.
and our assets go here and it becomes manageable.
Right.
That's how we...
You got it. You nailed it. I mean, that's my understanding. And Al-Anon has a really good twist on that, too. Al-Anon describes our character defects as actually assets gone haywire. Yeah, how about that? And so, but I love that about integrating those. And that's why I carefully say, that's why I chose not to say that the character defects would go away. Because you really don't, as tempting to say as that would be, I'm a cagey addict, and man, there are times when that is a useful tool where I'm kind of like, now wait a minute, now what does that really mean, and I'm questioning, and that can be overblown where I don't trust anybody and I don't take anybody's word. But it's a real asset for me at times where I'm really trying to glean the truth and not being overwhelmed by some nonsense, if you know what I mean. So I agree with that 100%. Our character defects, it's like those that are useful to God is one way of saying that too. Some of them are useful to us, and some of my character defects are useful in my identification with other people I'm trying to help. So you guys just figured out something really powerful that a lot of people who have been in recovery for decades don't know. And you guys just figured it out. You guys just figured out how recovery works. Because recovery does not work by asking you first and foremost to just stop doing something that has served you for a long, long time. As I said earlier, if that's the way it worked, all we would wind up is creepy and old. And you've seen them. If you go to 12-step meetings, you've seen them there. And that's not our destination. Our destination is to have our character changed. So let me flip it around. What if your life, starting today, moving forward, were to become simple, hopeful, manageable, foreign to what you're doing now, truthful, positive, peaceful, and a fantasy, seemingly? Would you have the need to go back to the old way of doing things? It wouldn't fit the purpose. It wouldn't serve a purpose anymore because you actually will have achieved what you've been looking for all along. See, our goals, these were our goals. These have been our goals all along. I acted out to be simple and hopeful. I tried to be manageable. I wanted to live a foreign life. I was trying to be truthful, positive, peaceful. I was certainly trying to do a fantasy. But who knew that vodka, meth, and hookers was not a loving higher power? Who knew? They worked so well for so long. Right? But I'm not asking us to give up our dreams. Our dreams were the right dreams. Our goals were the right goals. We just chose the wrong higher power. So all we're doing is going to keep the goals and apply it to a higher power that won't abandon us and that deeply loves us.
Can I challenge one thing that
Absolutely.
that you read on there
Yeah.
about it being foreign?
Uh-huh.
Because I see a lot of people relapse because even though they're all those other things, that they're happy, their food tastes better, their relationships are better, but everything is foreign. So they want to be comfortable and they want to be happy, but when they're happy, they're not comfortable because they're not in the familiar. And so what a lot of people don't figure out is if they stick with the new path long enough that they'll become comfortable, but it takes, depending on how long they were struggling with their addiction, the longer it takes them to become comfortable.
Right.
So they'll say, oh, like, yeah, I am happy, but everything is just so weird. I'd rather just go back to being the way that it was, because at least that was something, territory that I knew. So that was like the one blip on the radar was about that. I think that's one of the things that leads people back, even though everything else that you said can be on the list. They can feel that, but everything feels weird.
I agree with you 100%, but I would change the context a little bit because the way the term foreign came about is that I was asking, you know, what would it be like if your character defects were to dissolve and the character assets to take over, that the response was, well, it would seem foreign. It would seem like a foreign land. It would seem like so unusual to me because I've been practicing that, just as you said. So yeah, maybe in that context, I would say that foreign being a goal. I want my life now. I want my old life to seem like a foreign existence to the life I'm leading now. Does that make sense? Yeah. I don't ever want to forget what I was doing back in those days, because then I wouldn't have the ability to identify with other damaged souls that are in the middle of what's going on. But I love the idea that sometimes when I think back, I go, man, I can't believe I actually did some of that stuff. It seems so, yeah.
I'm kind of fond of my liability.
Yeah.
I think I would like to think it as, for me, I want forgiveness, faith, and unselfishness to manage my liability instead of taking some things. They're going to be there, but I like to learn how to manage them with the good part.
Yeah. And that makes perfect sense, and I like that, because in the surrender that we're going to do in the 7th step, that makes perfect sense as to why do we surrender the assets, you know, so that they can take charge and they can color then all of the other aspects that I'm damaged by or that I'm struggling with. I like that. That's great. Anything else? Yay, you guys, you figured out how recovery works. So I love the 9th step promises, but I like yours. I like the ones you guys came up with too. So if you want to write down the destination of recovery, and we'll add a tag so that we can clarify for it. So the destination of recovery, this is your words, not mine. What you guys came up with is, my life is to become simple. You guys said that your life is to become hopeful. You said that by following this all the way through, your life's to become manageable. Your old way of coping becomes foreign. You live a life that's truthful. Your outlook on life is going to be like your tie, positive. Right? I love that tie. You're going to be living a life of peacefulness. And it's going to seem like you're in some sort of a Disney fantasy where bluebirds that are caricatured just land on your shoulder and sing songs. And the dishes do themselves. And brooms somehow sweep up. And yeah. I'm grateful to you guys for coming up with that. You guys did a good job and a good list. And so now that we've done that, I want to look at, you guys did your 5th step, but we didn't get a chance to actually examine the 5th step. And so I want us to go. Now, from here on out, the passages are going to be linear. finally the big book gets it right, and we're not going to be jumping back and forth. So we're just going to carry our pages straight through. So you're now going to be on page 72, and that's where, starting with chapter 6, is where it's going to begin with the discussion of the fifth step. So it starts with a really, really good question that many of you probably were thinking. It starts with page 72, having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? So I wrote all this nasty stuff down. What am I going to do about it? And if you skip a sentence, it describes kind of the process you've been through. We have admitted certain defects. You guys did that, didn't you? We have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. Didn't you guys do that by circling the character defects? We have put our finger on weak items in our personal inventory. Now these are about to be cast out. I want you to underline that. That little innocuous line in the middle of a paragraph is that where I got that part about what would happen if the character defects were, I'm not making it up, it's in the big book. In my experiences, that's exactly what happens. This requires, though, action on our part, which when completed will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. This brings us to the fifth step. And then I want you to jump down about 6 lines from there. And do you see where it says, in actual practice, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient? Do you see that? Yeah. That's a pretty hysterical line, because that's exactly how I used to assess my character. Solitary self-examination. Anytime I do a solitary self-examination, I come out fantastic. Right? Like I can rationalize and, well, she started it. I'm just finishing it. Right? I can, well, it wasn't that bad, right? Could have been worse. I can, so it says many of us thought it necessary to go much further. Yeah. We will be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reason why we should do so. I need to know a good reason. Well, the best reason first. If we skip this vital step, we may stay sick. Now, how about that for a good reason? Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they stayed sick. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. Well, we think the reason is they never completed their house cleaning. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves, but they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else what? Yeah, all their life story. So look down at now it's going to talk about, which was on the podcast I listened to this morning, about selecting the people. How do you go about selecting people who you're going to hear your fifth step? So look at the very last line on 73. Oh, talking about the shame thing, let's do one more little line. Picking up where I left off, that little short paragraph is just amazing. More than most people, the addict leads a double life. He is very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents his stage character. Y'all agree? This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but he knows in his heart what? Yeah. Is that not it? This is like those guys have been reading my mail. Or something. They've been going through my dresser, reading my mail, and just stop it. Just stop it. Get away. Back away from the mailbox. That is just like so. I can identify so much.
Interesting though that, like, when I see you talk about your weaknesses, things, I don't have any judgment. I think this is great.
Oh.
He comes here and he's doing this. He's what a noble servant.
Thanks, Dad.
But
So
on the
nice.
contrary, though, if I were to admit my weaknesses, I would think people would think I'm terrible.
Yeah.
Why is it we think other people think we're terrible But when we see someone do it, we go, oh, cool.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, yeah, I think I think that is. I think it's kind of that shame. I think, and it just, boy, it takes a lot of work, and to get to a place. And I think what I see in you is just a man with a tremendous amount of empathy, and I feel in you a real desire, and a place that's achievable for you. And I think, but what has to happen is, I had to do a lot of exploration with Dr. Carnes and others about, like, where's my shame coming from? Like, where is it? What's the core of it? And so we did an exercise where we were listening to the voice of shame. Remember when I did the voice of addiction? All right, so what's that voice? Where does it come from? Well, for me, it's my alcoholic dad. Now, my alcoholic dad loved me, and he did the best he could, but boy, it was hard to see that in the beginning because I was so angry. And when I did my first inventory, it was mom and dad, and mom and dad, and mom and dad, and how dare they, and all of this. And I tell you, the longer that I've done this, and the more ACA work I've done, and we're getting ready to get to the place of forgiveness here in a bit, but that was kind of like the opening of the door, is that, and I'll talk about this in a second, but in order for me to really feel the healing, I had to, like, let some of this healing out on other people. And it's not an easy place, and you can't do it. I kind of felt like, biblically, well, I'm supposed to forgive like Jesus. Well, I can't. I am not there and never will be, so shoot me. And so it's just a process that I go through. I'll tell you one thing that I did learn, though. There's this notion that even God can't change the past. Have you ever heard that? Even God can't change the past. I disagree. Because I got a gift one time. When I was about a year sober, I was asked to tell my story for the first time at a 12-step retreat. And the yahoos there recorded it and gave me a copy of the recording. And so I went home, and I had just gotten, like, my first, iTunes account and whatever. So I plugged that thing in, and I didn't know, but it went into my iTunes. And so, somehow or other, I don't know these things. And so I like to walk through the neighborhood and put on my headphones, and I just put, my 1,600 songs on random. And just, so, like 8 years later, I'm walking through the neighborhood, and I come on. And this is not Elton John. Right, clearly. And I'm starting to tell my story. And and I'm listening to this guy. And I'm thinking, you know what? I had a better childhood than him. I mean, I kind of remember it different. A little bit, and it's like I could hear that, but I could hear the pain in his voice, and I could hear the, and not to dismiss that it didn't happen. I had to do ACA work and stare it straight in the nose. I could not turn my back on the realities, because that's what I had done so long. I had turned my back on the realities of what happened to me so long that I couldn't come to terms with it, and just left me just bitter and angry. So in my first step of ACA, we do a genogram of our whole family tree as far back as we can find, and we've got this zillions of characteristics that we apply to the generations going back, and we get help from sisters and uncles and God knows who else that's healthy, that is willing to put characteristics, and we look at that thing and we go, oh my God, no wonder I drank. Who would? Who would? With a track record like that, horse thieves, and so, and by looking at it square in the nose, and really inventorying exactly what happened, and then applying the forgiveness that I was accepting for myself to them in some way, I've come to realize that dadgummit, with all the bad that was done, they were doing the best they knew how. Because looking at the genogram, they didn't have a good, what kind of experience did they have? And what kind of experience did those folks have? And so there's a line in the 9th step of the ACA Big Book. There's this wonderful, wonderful description of the steps. And it likens the steps to a ropes course. And so we're doing a ropes course. And we're on the low elements, and we're doing the first 3 steps, and we're kind of negotiating, and we're going through low elements and doing this. And then all of a sudden, we get to, as we're going up to the inventory piece, we're faced with this pole. And we start to climb the pole. We got the harness on. We got the people on the ground, our people from our communities that are anchoring us. And we're going through, we're doing the inventory, we're doing our 5th step like you guys did. And the people are shouting encouragement to us as we go up the pole, and the stuff gets deeper, and we're looking down, and it's getting really afraid. And we get to the top of the pole, and it's shaky up there and weird, but we're kind of trusting that the harness is going to hold us. And we get our foot planted, and it's moving, and we get the other foot, and we're hardly going to fall. And finally we plant, and we slowly start to stand. And we get our balance, and we turn around, and we look behind us, and we see this sea of people. And the sea of people, as far back as we can look, are passing this giant, heavy ball. One row is passing it to the next row, passing it to the next row, and it's heavy and it's hard, and they're passing it, and they're just weakly limping along, and it's coming toward us. And as it gets closer in division, we look down and we recognize that there's our great-grandparents, passing it to our grandparents, passing it to our parents, who set the ball down at the bottom of the pole. And then we recognize what the ball is. It's shame. It's the shame that's been passed down from generation to generation to generation to generation that's been passed down to us. And then we turn our back on the crowd, and we look out over the sea of possibility, this open field of possibility, and freedom is out there. And in the ACA Big Book it says, and we step off the pole into step 9. Isn't that beautiful? I believe every bit of that. The ball of shame was passed up, and I carried it around for most of my life. And with the help of God and a treatment experience and a sponsor and the people that I've taken the steps to, because those guys have healed me as much as anybody. Every time I carry the steps to somebody, I'm being healed. And so by doing that, I've been able to take that ball of shame and leave it at the bottom of the pole, and I don't have to hand it off to baby Alex. How about that? How about that? Because he don't deserve it, and I didn't deserve it either, but he sure don't deserve it. Okay, so now we're at the bottom of page 73. And it's talking about how do we choose. Did I answer a question, or did I just talk all the way around it? Anyway, probably both. Probably both. You know, I'm from Mississippi. We got the gift of gab. So bottom of 73, this is about choosing. We must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long or happily in this world. Rightly and naturally, we think well before we choose the person or persons with whom to take this intimate and confidential step. Don't pick them out in Walmart. It doesn't say that, but it should. It could have. Those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires confession must, and of course will want, to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty it is to receive it. Though we have no religious connection, we may still do well to talk with someone ordained by an established religion. We often find such a person quick to see and understand our problem. Of course, we sometimes encounter people who do not understand addiction. If we cannot or would rather not do this, we searched our acquaintance for a closed-mouthed, understanding friend. Perhaps our doctor or psychologist will be the person. So a couple of thoughts on that. You know, the big book of AA in the basic text, I steal that from NA, but in the first 164 pages, doesn't mention the word sponsor anywhere in that. And many, though, believe that that is the first reference to sponsorship, closed-mouthed, understanding friend. I think we get sponsorship a little off today from what it was. I think we think of sponsor as being too much of a top-down experience, somebody that has all the knowledge, imparting something to people that don't know nothing. And I really don't accept that so much. What I say to the guys I work with, I say, why don't you join us? Why don't you join me and my guys, and we're going to get better together. We're all on a journey together. I ain't got this thing down pat. I'm practicing just like I'm going to suggest you practice. And if you want to do what we're doing and you like where we're going, then just join us and we'll get better together. We create a kind of a sober posse, and we just sort of ride along into the sunset and just get better. Just, you know, get better together. The two of us, I suggest, are going to join in a partnership with the universe. And that's going to be the power that's going to propel us, and we're going to do the best we can to tap into that power, and then we're going to share our struggles as we go along, cutting our burdens in two every time we share them, and we're going to keep our burdens to be as minimal as possible so that we can carry on and progress and get better together. It's kind of the way I think. So look down at the last paragraph on 74 at the bottom of that page. Notwithstanding the great necessity for discussing ourselves with someone, it may be one is so situated that there's no suitable person available. You know, some of you guys didn't feel like you had the suitable person here and didn't take that, and I commend you for being cautious. And it gives you a chance. Right here it says, if that is so, the step may be postponed. So you can postpone the 5th step and go on through to the end of the 12th and do this quick as you can. It says, however, this step may be postponed only, however, if we hold ourselves in complete readiness to go through with it at the first opportunity. We say this because we're very anxious to talk to the right person. It's important that he be able to keep a confidence, that he'll fully understand and approve of what we are driving at, that he will not try to change our plan, but we must not use this as a mere excuse to postpone. When we decide who is to hear our story, what? We waste no time. Yeah, if you'll notice the language of the steps up until now, have you noticed how it's been reading? Next, at once, and we waste no time. The steps were designed to be done quickly and often. Next, at once, we waste no time. Bing, I mean, we are really cranking through them. All right, so the next paragraph is going to describe the 5th step very briefly, and then it's going to do, if you like to make a note out to the side, this next paragraph is called the 5th step promises. It starts off, we pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. How about that for a promise? We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. Underline that. That's the first place in the big book that the promised spiritual experience is first mentioned. In other words, you can do steps 1, 2, 3 over and over again and never have a spiritual experience. You can write 100 inventories and never get better. It's not until after you share your 5th step then the first mention of the spiritual experience is first, you're encountered that first. How about that? You know, you can do all those inventories and learn everything there is to know about yourself, and self-knowledge will avail you not a thing. Not a thing. You got to share. You got to be honest. You got to share this stuff. And then it says, the feeling that the addiction problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway. There's a term for the higher power, capital B, capital H. Broad highway. It's not a narrow road with a lot of rules and regulations. It's a broad highway. I mean, I describe it as it's so broad I can't even see the ditches. That's a Mississippi thing. Walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. There's another term for the higher power, capital S, capital U. Okay, can I tell you one more story? Okay. So I sat with my sponsor. He took me through the first 3 steps in about an hour. Then he said, now you're going to do an inventory. Here's how you do it. He says, you better get busy because we're going to meet here next Saturday and I want you to share your inventory with me. So I had a deadline. And so we met back the next Saturday. I had written stuff out, resentments, fears, and the harms that I had done. And we sat for maybe an hour, hour and a half, and I went through and told him all my stories. At the end of that, I closed my spiral book that I had written in, and he looked up at me and he had this great line. He said, "Did you leave anything out?" Now, I thought he knew something about me, that had happened, that he knew that I was leaving out on purpose, and I thought, oh my God, like a body buried somewhere that I'd forgotten, And I said, no, I can't think of anything, meaning, what do you know? And he said, oh, no. He says, I just wanted to make sure. He says, I said, I think you did good. And if you think of something later that we should have talked about, you just ring me up and we'll meet and we'll go over it. How about that isn't that freeing, It doesn't have to be rigid. You don't got to do it perfect. You ain't going to do it perfect. And so he said, and now I need to tell you something that my sponsor told me and his sponsor told him that had been passed down through the generations of recovery. And I make up that it's why I flew halfway across the United States to be here with you to tell you this thing. My sponsor said to me, as I say to many of you, that you are good men and women. And you either have a bad disease or you love somebody that has or has had a bad disease. And it's caused you to do some things you would have never done if you hadn't had it or loved somebody that had it. And because of that, you are forgiven. And this is the way the forgiveness piece works. The people in the rooms of recovery all around this state forgive you. The people in the rooms of recovery all over the planet forgive you. I forgive you. And God forgives you. Because you're good men and women that have a bad disease, or you've loved somebody that has a bad disease. Caused each of us to do some stuff we would have never done if we hadn't had it. And because of that, you are forgiven. And I can't explain to you what happened next except to say that the door to my heart that was closed so tightly shut for so long, when I walked away from that place that day, opened up just enough to let a little ray of light in. And I remember thinking to myself that if I was to accept this forgiveness for me, that maybe, just maybe, I could let a little of that leak out of me and leak onto my dad. Because I guess that meant that my dad was a good man who had a bad disease, caused him to do some things he wouldn't have done if he hadn't had it. And I guess he deserved some of that forgiveness too. Now, fast forward from that, several years later, and I go on a spiritual retreat with a bunch of normies. I love normies. so adorable. And they broke us up into these small groups, and they wanted us to share about spiritual experiences. A normie is a non-addict. They're frickin' adorable. They're this linear thinking that they do is priceless. They're like A plus B equals C. And I'm like, what about L? Give me some K. I'll show you some C. You gotta like stir it up first. You know what I'm talking about? They're just so cute.
They're just addicts in denial, right?
Well, I don't even think that. I mean, I just think there's something wrong with their brains. They're so like, well, here, okay, so this is not working, so I guess I'll do that, and I'll probably get that. And I'll go, what? You got to ruminate on this a little while. We got to study this from angles. And they're cute, cute, cute. And so they put me in a group with these people, and they ask us to share about spiritual experiences. So I go, I'm an addict. I'm an addict. And I got sober in the rooms of recovery. Did me an inventory about my life. Shared it with my sponsor. Sponsor said I was forgiven. Is a spiritual experience. And they said, lady looked at me and she goes, so. I said, yeah, and I go around sponsoring people and doing workshops and telling people they're forgiven. So, you go around giving absolution. My God, that sounds like something you need a license for. Or a special car tag. Or like hardware. At least a special shirt. You need a shirt to be doing that, and I got none of that. And that just kind of, I tried not to let on, but that really got to me. And I left there, and I found this guy at the retreat that I really loved. His name was Father Ed Lundeen. And I ran him down. He lives in Austin now. I ran him down, and I said, Father Ed, I got something real important to ask you. I said, I'm an addict. And I got sober in the rooms of recovery, and I did an inventory of my life, and my sponsor told me I was forgiven. Now I go around doing workshops and sponsoring people and telling people they're forgiven. I want to know, am I doing anything wrong? And Father Ed bent down, and he looked at me, and he said, you keep doing whatever it is you've been doing. So I don't know about nobody else, but I do know this about you. All you guys are forgiven because Father Ed said so. So, now, Father Ed, I never followed up with him about what that meant to me, you know, and that moment in time. And, you know, I left that retreat, and I just used that, and I use that story as I go around. And so years later, I heard that Father Ed was coming through town. And so I said, we got to have lunch. I got to tell Father Ed, you know, what he meant to me and what he's done. Because I've imparted that to well over 5,000 people. And so we meet at lunch. And so I'm telling Father Ed, you remember that retreat? Remember I came to you? You probably don't, but let me tell you, I came to you. And I'm telling him the story. And as I'm telling him the story, he's leaning over. And I get to the point, and you bent down, and you said to me, and he's like leaning way over, and I said, and you said to me for me to keep doing whatever I was doing. And he reared back in his chair, and he slapped his head, and he went, thank God! And the whole restaurant turned around and looked at him, and he said this, he said, thank God I didn't give you some canon nonsense out of some book somewhere. Thank God he said, I just said it straight out like that to you. Because I could have given you something out of a something on page so-and-so that said a something about God knows what. You know, because he says, you know, by all right, that's a right of the church. Right? By all right, that is exclusive to priests. But he said, you know, but aren't we all priests? Aren't we all called to carry the message of healing to people? You know? So God bless you, Father Ed. What do y'all think? You like that? Let's take a break.